The 12 cars appeared at 4:11 in the morning. Not one, not two. 12. By sunrise, they filled every foot of gravel between the road and the garage of a modest ranch house outside Sheridan, Wyoming. Some were missing wheels. Some had shattered windows. One had weeds growing through the engine bay. Another still carried a faded auction sticker that read, "Economically repairable." The drivers who delivered them never knocked on the door. They never left a note. They unloaded the vehicles beneath the glow of portable work lights, climbed back into their flatbeds, and disappeared into the darkness before the first porch light came on anywhere in the valley. By 7 o'clock, 3 neighbors had already taken photographs. By 8, someone posted the pictures in a local community group. By 9, people were laughing. Most of them had never met Mason Hale. That never stopped anyone, especially in a small town. The caption beneath the photographs read, "Looks like somebody finally started a junkyard." More than 200 people reacted before lunchtime. A few added jokes. One suggested the county should issue a health citation. Another asked whether the owner had lost a bet. Nobody asked why the cars had appeared overnight. Nobody asked whether they belonged there. Nobody asked what was really happening. Mason Hale woke up at 5:30 that morning without an alarm. He always did. The habit came from another life, a different city, a different career, one he rarely talked about anymore. He moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake his daughter. Coffee first, then eggs, then the lunchbox. Then 3 soft knocks on the bedroom door at the end of the hallway. Always 3, never 2, never 4. The door opened. A 10-year-old girl stood there rubbing one eye. Her name was Ava, messy brown hair, oversized t-shirt, one sock missing as usual. "You made pancakes?" she asked. "Not today. Oatmeal?" "Yeah." She sighed dramatically. Then followed him toward the kitchen. Their house wasn't large. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom, an attached garage. The furniture didn't match. The refrigerator made a clicking noise every few hours. The kitchen clock ran 3 minutes slow. Mason had meant to fix it for almost 6 months. He never seemed to get around to it. A framed photograph sat above the coffee maker. A woman standing beside a lake, laughing, wind in her hair. Ava never asked him to take it down. Mason never considered it. Some things stayed where they belonged, even after everything else changed. The phone rang while Ava was eating. Mason glanced at the screen. Cal Tucker, neighbor, ranch owner, professional collector of local gossip. Mason's answered. There was silence on the other end. Not the normal kind. The kind people create when they don't know how to begin a sentence. Finally, Cal spoke. "You still inside?" "Yeah." Another pause. "Then you should probably come outside." Mason looked toward the window. The curtains were still closed. "Why?" "You'll see. The line disconnected. That wasn't like Cal." Mason set the phone down, walked to the front door, opened it and stopped. The driveway looked like a salvage yard. 12 vehicles, 2 rows, perfectly arranged, a rusted pickup, a burned-out sedan, 3 SUVs, 2 wrecked coupes, a delivery van with no rear doors, and several others that appeared to have lost arguments with both time and gravity. Ava stepped beside him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, "Did we win them?" Mason stared at the vehicles. His expression didn't change. "Win what? The cars?" "No." "Did somebody leave them here?" "Looks that way." She considered this, then asked the question adults usually avoided. "Why?" Mason didn't answer immediately. Because he already knew, not the details, not yet. But the reason. The vehicles weren't random. They were arranged too carefully, delivered too efficiently, placed too deliberately. This wasn't vandalism, it wasn't a prank. It was a message. Cal appeared at the property line a few minutes later. Coffee cup in one hand, baseball cap in the other. He looked exhausted. "I saw the tow trucks around 3. You call the sheriff?" Cal nodded. "They're coming." Mason walked slowly toward the nearest vehicle. His boots crunched on gravel. The morning air carried the smell of dust and cold metal. Most people saw junk. Mason saw information. The first pickup told him almost nothing. The second vehicle told him slightly more. The third had auction markings beneath the paint. The fourth had recently replaced brake lines, despite being classified as scrap. Interesting. Very interesting. Then he reached the 8th car and stopped. Completely. The vehicle sat lower than the others. 4 layers of mist paint covered the body. The windshield was gone. The interior looked destroyed. To everyone else, it was garbage. To Mason, something felt wrong. Not dangerous wrong, like a sentence with one word out of place. He crouched beside the front fender, ran 2 fingers along the lower frame rail, tapped once, then again the sound echoed differently. His eyes narrowed. Ava noticed immediately. She always did. Dad? No answer. Dad? Mason stood slowly, still looking at the car. Then something happened that Cal Tucker had not seen in nearly 6 years. Mason smiled, just slightly, barely enough to notice. But it was there. Cal stared at him. What? Mason kept looking at the 8th vehicle. The smile remained for exactly 3 seconds, then disappeared. Finally, he said, somebody just made a very expensive mistake. And for the first time that morning, he wasn't looking at the 12 cars. He was looking beyond them, toward whoever had sent them. By noon, the photographs had spread far beyond Sheridan. Some people shared them because they found the situation funny. Others shared them because they were curious. A few shared them because they genuinely believed Mason Hale had finally fallen apart. Those people knew the least about him. The county sheriff arrived at 10:17. Deputy Carson Bell was in his late 50s and carried himself like a man who had spent decades dealing with problems created by other people's poor decisions. He stepped out of the cruiser, looked at the vehicles, looked at Mason, then looked back at the vehicles again. These yours? No. You order them? No. You know who did? Not yet. Carson nodded. That answer seemed to satisfy him more than any elaborate explanation could have. He spent 20 minutes documenting VIN numbers. Most had already been partially removed. Some records were missing. Others led to salvage auctions scattered across 4 states. Whoever organized this had been careful. Very careful. That interested Mason more than the cars themselves. Because random people rarely spent money on careful humiliation. People did that only when something mattered. The question was what? After the deputy left, Mason returned to the 8th car. The others could wait. This one couldn't. He opened the warped driver's door. The hinges groaned. Dust drifted through sunlight. The interior looked destroyed, seats gone. Dashboard cracked, wiring hanging loose, rat nests beneath the steering column. At first glance, exactly what appeared to be. A dead vehicle at second glance, something else entirely. Mason crouched beside the firewall, his fingers moved across the metal, slowly, patiently, feeling, listening, not searching for parts, searching for history. Every vehicle carries history. Most people never learn how to read it. Mason had spent nearly 15 years doing exactly that. The scratches, the welds, the replacement panels, the paint depth, the corrosion pattern. They told stories, and stories were difficult to fake. Ava sat nearby on an overturned bucket. Her stuffed rabbit rested beside her. She watched silently. Eventually, she asked, "What's wrong with this one?" Mason smiled slightly. "The same thing that's right with it." She frowned. That answer was not satisfactory. Children hate mysterious adults. That doesn't make sense. It will. When? Soon. Ava sighed dramatically. Again, then returned to her sketchbook. Mason removed a small flashlight from his jacket, shined it beneath the dashboard, then froze. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just enough the kind of pause another professional would notice immediately. Something had been removed, not stolen, removed carefully. Recently, 4 mounting bolts remained. Fresh tool marks surrounded them. The metal beneath was cleaner than everything around it. Someone had taken something out, not long ago. Interesting, very interesting. Mason continued examining the vehicle. 2 hours later, he found something even stranger. The rear quarter panel carried a serial stamp inconsistent with the vehicle registration. Not illegal, not impossible, but unusual. Unusual enough that he photographed it immediately. Then sent the image to exactly one person. The blub arrived 13 minutes later. 3 words, "Call me now." The sender was Victor Lang, Detroit. Former restoration specialist, former auction consultant, former business partner, former friend. Mason hadn't spoken to him in almost 3 years. The phone rang once before Victor answered. "Mason." Victor silenced then. "Where did you find that car?" "Someone left it in my driveway." "No, what?" Victor's voice became lower, more serious. "That car wasn't supposed to exist anymore." Mason looked through the garage window toward the driveway, toward the 8th vehicle, toward the faded layers of paint. His expression remained calm, but his attention sharpened, the way it always did before something important. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Victor was choosing words carefully. I saw that chassis 6 years ago." Mason said nothing. "I also saw someone pay nearly $400,000 trying to find it." The garage suddenly felt quieter. Outside, wind moved through dry grass. Inside, Ava hummed softly while drawing. Mason stared at the vehicle. "What exactly is it?" Victor exhaled, then answered. "It's not the car that's valuable." That wasn't reassuring. It's what used to be hidden inside it. Mason looked at the empty dashboard, the missing mount points, the recently removed hardware. Suddenly, several details aligned. Not enough, but enough to become dangerous. Who was looking for it? Victor hesitated, then said a name. Mason recognized it immediately. Everyone in automotive finance recognized it, especially people who worked around high-value collections. Rachel Sterling, owner of Sterling Automotive Holdings. 3 luxury dealerships, private collector, investor $48 million in annual revenue, and according to every public interview she'd ever given. A relentless competitor, the kind who remembered slights, the kind who never forgot unfinished business, the kind who could absolutely arrange for 12 junk cars to appear in someone's driveway. Mason ended the call, walked outside. The Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above the valley, blue, cold, deceptively peaceful. Across town, Rachel Sterling sat in the glass conference room of Sterling Automotive Holdings. The room overlooked Interstate 90. Traffic moved below like a slow river of metal. 3 executives sat across from her. None looked comfortable. Rachel rarely created comfortable meetings. She was 46 years old, precise, disciplined, exceptionally intelligent. The type of woman who read contracts twice and remembered details years later. People described her as intimidating. That wasn't entirely accurate. She wasn't intimidating because she raised her voice. She was intimidating because she paid attention, the kind of attention that exposed weaknesses. One executive finished his quarterly presentation. Rachel nodded. Nothing more, which somehow felt worse. Then her assistant entered quietly, placed a folder beside her and whispered something. Rachel opened the folder. Inside was a printed photograph, 12 cars, a gravel driveway, a ranch house, and Mason Hale, standing beside car number 8. For the first time all morning. Rachel stopped listening to the meeting. The executive noticed immediately. Everyone did. Because Rachel Sterling never lost focus. Not accidentally. Her eyes remained on the photograph, particularly on the 8th vehicle. A faint line appeared between her eyebrows, then disappeared. The meeting ended 4 minutes early. A personal record. The executives left quickly. The assistant remained. Rachel looked up. Who took this photo? Community social media page. When? This morning. Rachel leaned back slightly, still studying the image. Then she asked the question. The only question that mattered. Has he opened the 8th car yet? The assistant blinked. Excuse me? Rachel repeated it, slower this time. Has he opened the 8th car? The assistant swallowed. I don't know. Rachel stood, walked toward the window. Outside, trucks moved along the interstate. Small from this height, temporary, disposable, most things were. But not all, and the 8th car definitely wasn't. She stared at the distant horizon, then spoke quietly, almost to herself. He wasn't supposed to find that one. Back in Sheridan, Mason finally opened the trunk. At first he saw nothing, just rust. Dust, old carpet, then his flashlight beam struck a section of metal that shouldn't have existed. A hidden compartment. Factory work never looked like that. This had been added later, professionally. Carefully, deliberately, someone had wanted something hidden, and someone else had removed it, but not completely, because wedged behind a support bracket, barely visible beneath decades of dust, was a small black memory card. Mason stared at it. The compartment was empty. Except for that one tiny piece left behind. One mistake, one clue. One reason 12 junk cars suddenly seemed far more expensive than anyone realized. He carefully removed the card, turned it over once, then slipped it into his pocket. And for the first time that day, he wondered whether the cars had been delivered to bury him, or to bury something else. Mason did not check the memory card immediately. Most people would have. That was one reason most people made mistakes. Excitement creates carelessness. Carelessness creates opportunities for other people. Instead, he locked the garage, made dinner, helped Ava with her math homework, washed dishes, placed the lunch containers beside the sink, then sat alone at the kitchen table after the house became quiet. The same table where unpaid utility bills waited beneath a ceramic bowl full of loose change. The same table where his wife had once spent an entire evening trying to teach Ava how to fold paper cranes. The same table where difficult decisions usually arrived. A small desk lamp illuminated only part of the room. Everything beyond that circles of light disappeared into shadow. The memory card sat beside a cold cup of coffee. Mason looked at it for a long time, then finally inserted it into an old laptop. Nothing happened at first. No dramatic discovery, no secret database, no encrypted files, just 4 folders, each labeled with dates, 5 years old. 6 years old, 7 years old. The oldest folder contained photographs. Hundreds of them, vehicle identification numbers, auction inventories, transport manifests, warehouse records. Nothing unusual, at least not immediately. The second folder was different. Mason opened one image, then another, then another. A pattern emerged, the same vehicle appearing multiple times. Different VIN numbers, different paperwork, different auction locations, same car. His eyes narrowed. That was impossible, except it wasn't. Not if someone was washing vehicle identities. Not if someone was creating false ownership histories. Not if someone was laundering collector vehicles through salvage auctions. Interesting. Very interesting, he continued. The third folder contained spreadsheets, thousands of entries, transaction histories, ownership transfers, insurance settlements, restorations invoices, and beside many of the entries sat one recurring name. Sterling Holdings, Rachel Sterling's company. Mason leaned back slightly. Outside, wind pushed against the kitchen window. The house settled with a quiet creak. For several seconds, he simply stared at the screen. Not because the evidence was shocking, because it was too organized. Someone had spent years building this file, years documenting everything, which meant they had expected trouble or feared something worse. Then he opened the final folder, the video folder. 37 files. The first video lasted 11 seconds. The second lasted 42, the third just over 3 minutes. Mason clicked play. A warehouse appeared, poor lighting, industrial shelving, stacks of vehicle components. The footage was shaky, secretly recorded. Someone was hiding the camera. Several people entered the frame. One of them immediately caught Mason's attention. Not Rachel Sterling. A man late 50s, gray suit, expensive watch. Known face, very known. Mason sat upright. He recognized him instantly. Everyone in Wyoming did. Harold Denton, chairman of the Transportation Development Board. One of the most politically connected men in the region. The footage continued. Boxes changed hands. Documents exchanged. Several VIN plates visible on a table. Then came the audio. Poor quality, but understandable. One sentence stood out, clear as glass. Nobody traces them once they pass through the salvage pipeline. The video ended. Mason watched it again. Then a third time. The room felt different now. Smaller. He wasn't looking at an abandoned collector car anymore. He wasn't looking at auction fraud. He wasn't even looking at Rachel Sterling. He was looking at something bigger. Much bigger. The kind of thing that destroyed careers. The kind of thing powerful people spent money to hide. The kind of thing that explained why 12 vehicles had appeared overnight. A soft sound came from the hallway. Mason quickly minimized the screen. Ava stood there, half asleep, holding the stuffed rabbit. "You okay?" Mason smiled, the real smile, the one reserved for her. "Yeah, you look like you're thinking." "I usually am." She accepted that. Children often accept truths adults question. Ava rubbed one eye. "Are the cars bad?" Mason looked toward the dark garage visible through the kitchen window. The 8th car sat hidden inside, silent, patient, waiting. Finally, he answered. "I don't think they're the problem." "What is?" For a moment, he considered telling her the truth, then decided against it. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." She nodded, satisfied enough, then disappeared back toward her room. Mason watched the hallway for a few seconds after she was gone. Only then did he reopen the video and watch the remaining files. At 2:13 in the morning, he made a phone call. Victor answered immediately, almost as if he hadn't been sleeping. "Tell me you didn't open the files." "I opened them." Silence longer this time. "You found the videos?" "Yes." Victor exhaled heavily. The sound carried years of regret. "I hoped that card was gone." "Whose card was it?" Another pause, then mine. The kitchen suddenly became very quiet. Outside, somewhere beyond the darkness, a freight train sounded its horn. Low, lonely. Far away, Mason waited. Victor continued. 7 years ago, I worked as an evaluator for an auction consortium. "You told me that." "I wasn't just evaluating cars." That got Mason's attention. "What were you doing?" Victor laughed once, without humor. "The same thing everyone else was doing." "And that was?" "Looking away." The answer hung between them. Neither man spoke. Finally, Victor continued. "There was a network. Rachel Sterling? No, then who? People above her." Mason looked again at Harold Denton's face frozen on the laptop screen. Suddenly, several pieces began fitting together. Not all of them enough. Victor's voice lowered. The vehicles weren't the product. What were? The identities. Now Mason understood. Collector cars, insurance payouts, salvage auctions, false VIN histories, artificial ownership chains, millions of dollars moving through paperwork instead of vehicles. Not theft, something more sophisticated, more difficult to detect, more profitable. And if the files were genuine, somebody had documented everything, every transaction, every participant, every lie. Mason asked the question that mattered most. Why wasn't it exposed? Victor laughed again, same humorless sound. Because the man who collected the evidence disappeared. The words settled heavily. Mason's eyes moved back toward the screen. Disappeared? 3 days before he planned to meet federal investigators. Neither man spoke. The clock above the refrigerator ticked, 3 minutes behind schedule. Just as it always had. Finally, Mason asked what was his name. Victor answered immediately, like he'd never forgotten. Elliot Kane. Mason froze, not visibly, not dramatically. Just enough. Because he knew that name. The title paperwork attached to car number 8 listed a previous owner, Elliot Kane. Suddenly the room felt colder. The car wasn't random. The memory card wasn't random. The delivery wasn't random. Somebody knew exactly where that vehicle was. Somebody wanted it gone. Hidden, buried, forgotten instead. It ended up in Mason Hale's driveway. Victor spoke again. Listen carefully. Mason remained silent. If Rachel knows that card still exists. He stopped. What? Victor's answer came quietly. Too quietly. The cars won't be the last thing she sends. The line went dead. Mason sat alone in the darkness. Laptop glowing softly, the memory card beside him. The evidence sitting inside a machine worth less than $200. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched endlessly across the valley. Somewhere out there, people believed they had buried the truth years ago. Somewhere out there, someone was beginning to realize they had failed. And somewhere out there, Rachel Sterling's phone began ringing. Rachel Sterling received the call at 2:41 in the morning. She was still awake. That wasn't unusual. People often imagined successful executives sleeping peacefully in large homes with perfect schedules. Reality looked different. Her kitchen lights were on. A half-finished cup of tea sat beside an open financial report. Several acquisition proposals covered the granite countertop. And Rachel was reviewing numbers for the 3rd time. Not because she didn't trust her analysts. Because she trusted them enough to verify everything herself. The phone vibrated. Private number. Rachel answered immediately. No greeting, no hesitation. A man's voice spoke, only 6 words. The memory card wasn't recovered. Silence. Rachel slowly set down her pen. The kitchen suddenly felt much quieter. What did you say? It wasn't in the compartment. For the first time that evening, something changed behind Rachel's eyes. Not panic. She rarely panicked, but calculation accelerated. The way it does when a chess player realizes the board contains a piece he thought was gone. Who found the vehicle? We don't know. You know. Another pause. Then, the car was delivered to a property outside Sheridan. Rachel already knew the answer before he finished. Mason Hale. The name surfaced immediately. She remembered seeing it on the photograph. She remembered the expression on his face, the one detail that bothered her most. Not anger, not confusion. Interest. People who were frightened could be managed. People who were curious were dangerous. The call ended 3 minutes later. Rachel remained standing in her kitchen, motionless. The tea had gone cold. She never noticed. Instead, she walked toward the large window overlooking the dark valley beyond her property. Her reflection stared back. Sharp eyes, perfect posture, controlled breathing. Everything exactly as it should be. Except one thing. Elliot Kane's evidence had survived. And if it survived. Then the story wasn't finished. 7 years earlier, Rachel had believed it ended permanently. Apparently, she had been wrong. Very wrong. Meanwhile, 70 miles away, Mason Hale was sitting in his garage. The laptop remained open. The videos remained frozen on the screen. Ava's stuffed rabbit sat on a shelf nearby where she had forgotten it earlier. One ear bent sideways. The white fur worn thin from years of use. Mason's glanced at it occasionally. The object somehow grounded the room, made everything feel smaller, more manageable. Outside, the Wyoming wind rattled the metal siding. Inside, he reviewed the files again, not searching for obvious answers. Searching for inconsistencies. Professionals reveal themselves through mistakes. The question was whose mistake? At 3:17 a.m. he found one. A reflection, nothing more. 2 seconds inside a warehouse video. A chrome toolbox, a polished metal surface. Someone's face reflected briefly. Most viewers would never notice it. Mason paused the footage. Zoomed in, the image degraded immediately. Still, enough remained. Enough to identify a beard, gray hair, a scar beneath the left eye. Something about the man felt familiar, very familiar. Yet Mason couldn't place him, not yet. He wrote a note in a yellow notebook. Page 32? Reflection man, scar left eye, warehouse video 12. Then closed the notebook, the same notebook he'd used for years. Oil stains. Bent corners, receipts folded inside. His handwriting had grown smaller over time, more precise. More economical. The notebook rested beside another object. A silver key. Old, worn smooth, discovered 30 minutes earlier. Hidden beneath the rear seat bracket of car number 8. At first, Mason thought it belonged to the vehicle. Then he noticed the engraving. A storage company logo. Not local. Denver, Colorado. Interesting. A hidden compartment. A memory card, and now a storage key. Whoever created this trail expected someone to follow it. The question was whether that someone had been Elliot Kane, or somebody else entirely. Morning arrived too quickly. At 6:30, Ava entered the kitchen carrying the stuffed rabbit. Its name was Winston. Nobody remembered why. Children often named things for reasons adults never learned. Did you sleep? Mason poured coffee. Some. That's not an answer. He smiled slightly. No. Ava nodded, as if confirming information she already suspected. Then she climbed onto a stool. Are the cars still there? Most of them. Good. Mason raised an eyebrow. Good? She shrugged. They make people stare. That answer surprised him. Why is that good? Ava thought about it. Children take questions seriously when adults bother asking them. Finally, she answered. Because now they're looking at the cars. What were they looking at before? You. Mason looked at her. The simplicity of the observation made it difficult to respond. Ava spooned oatmeal into her mouth. Conversation over. At 8:15, a black SUV appeared at the edge of the property. Not local, rental plates, late model vehicle, government package. Mason noticed immediately, so did the driver. A tall woman stepped out. Early 50s, dark coat, practical boots, no visible makeup. No attempt to impress anyone, which often impressed people anyway. She approached calmly, stopped 10 feet away, studied the driveway, studied the vehicles. Finally studied Mason. Most people looked at the man. She looked at the details. The repaired fence section. The organized workbench visible through the garage. The notebook in his hand. The 8th car. Especially the 8th car. Then she spoke. You're Mason Hale, not a question. A statement. Depends who's asking. The woman smiled slightly. Fair. She extended a hand. Claire Donovan. Mason didn't move. The name meant nothing, which was unusual, she noticed. Retired federal investigator. Now the name meant something a little. Not enough. Retired from what? Financial crimes. Interesting, very interesting. Claire's eyes moved briefly toward the 8th vehicle. Not long, just enough, then back to Mason's. You found something. Again, not a question. Mason remained silent. Claire nodded, as if silence itself confirmed the answer. The wind shifted. Dust moved across the gravel. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Then she said something unexpected. 7 years ago, a man named Elliot Kane tried to expose a criminal network. Mason said nothing. Claire continued. He disappeared before meeting investigators. The name hung in the air. Heavy, unavoidable. Elliot contacted me 3 days before he vanished. That got Mason's attention. Not visibly, but enough Claire saw it. Professionals notice small things. He said if anything happened to him. She paused, watching Mason carefully. The evidence would eventually find its own way home. The words settled between them. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Finally, Mason asked, What does that mean? Claire smiled, not because she knew, because she didn't, and uncertainty interested her. That's why I'm here. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The wind moved through the valley. The 12 vehicles sat silently in the driveway. The 8th car seemed almost to be listening. Then Mason made a decision. Not a large one. Just enough, he reached into his jacket pocket, removed the silver key, and showed it to her. Nothing more. Claire's expression changed instantly, not dramatically. Professionals rarely react dramatically, but this time, she couldn't completely hide it, because she recognized the engraving. Immediately, completely, and that frightened her. The realization appeared in her eyes before she spoke. Where did you get that? Mason watched her carefully. The car. Claire took a slow breath, then looked toward the mountains, not because the view mattered, because she needed a second when she finally turned back. Her voice was quieter, far quieter. Elliot rented a storage unit 2 weeks before he disappeared. Mason felt the world narrow slightly, only slightly enough. Claire continued. Nobody ever found it. The silver key rested in Mason's hand, cold, heavy, ordinary, and suddenly far more valuable than any vehicle in the driveway. Then Claire said the one thing neither of them expected. The storage facility burned down 6 years ago. Silence, Mason frowned. If it burned down, it didn't. Claire cut him off. The records burned. Now the puzzle changed shape again, not destroyed, hidden, protected. Someone had erased the location, not the contents, and if that was true, then somewhere in Colorado, a storage unit still existed, waiting, locked, untouched, for 7 years. Mason Hale did not leave for Colorado immediately. That surprised Claire Donovan. Most people would have packed within an hour. Most people would have imagined hidden millions, buried secrets, or some dramatic revelation waiting inside a forgotten storage unit. Mason's imagined something else: problems. Because every valuable thing he had ever found eventually came attached to one. The silver key sat on the kitchen table all evening, beside a grocery receipt, beside a cracked ceramic mug, beside Ava's latest drawing. The drawing showed 12 ugly cars and a rabbit driving one of them. Winston apparently had acquired a driver's license. Mason stared at the picture longer than he intended, then folded it carefully and slipped it inside his notebook. Object number 3. The notebook, the rabbit, the photograph above the coffee maker. The things that anchored reality whenever life became strange. And life was becoming very strange. Across the state, Rachel Sterling had reached the same conclusion. The key existed. The evidence existed. And if Claire Donovan was involved, the timeline had suddenly accelerated. Rachel sat inside a conference room at Sterling Automotive Holdings just after sunset. Only one other person occupied the room, a man named Grant Mercer, former military intelligence, former corporate investigator, current head of security, 52 years old, calm, professional, expensive, the kind of man who entered rooms quietly and somehow became the most dangerous person inside them. Rachel slid a photograph across the table, the silver key. Nothing else. Grant studied it. 30 seconds, no reaction then. Storage facility. Rachel nodded. Colorado. Grant looked up. Confirmed? No, but likely. Grant leaned back slightly. The chair never squeaked. People like Grant rarely sat in squeaky chairs. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the window. Dark mountains beyond the city, the same mountains she'd spent years climbing over professionally, acquiring, negotiating. Winning, then she spoke. Find it before they do. Grant nodded once. Nothing more, no questions, no discussion, just acceptance. Professionals understood instructions without needing emotional decoration. The meeting ended 4 minutes later. At dawn the following morning, 2 SUVs headed south. Neither Mason nor Rachel knew it yet. Both were traveling toward the same destination, and both believed they were ahead. Only one was correct. The drive to Colorado took nearly 8 hours. Claire spent most of it reviewing old case notes. Mason spent most of it driving. The Wyoming plains gave way to rolling hills. The hills became highways. The highways became city traffic. Ava remained with Cal Tucker's family during the trip. Before leaving, Mason had promised her 3 things. He would call every night. He would not forget Winston. And he would return before school on Monday. She accepted all 3 conditions, though she demanded photographic proof regarding Winston. Children negotiate harder than lawyers. Denver appeared shortly after 3 in the afternoon. Glass towers, traffic, construction cranes, noise. The city felt enormous after Sheridan. Claire directed them toward an industrial district on the eastern edge of town. Warehouse after warehouse passed outside the truck windows. Most looked identical, which made them perfect hiding places. Finally, she pointed. There. The building looked ordinary, a faded sign, chain-link fencing, security cameras, storage, lockers. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. Exactly the type of location people ignored. Mason parked. The silver key remained in his pocket, suddenly heavier than before. Inside the office sat an elderly manager reading a paperback novel. He wore thick glasses, gray suspenders, and the expression of a man who had survived decades of customer stupidity. Claire introduced herself. The manager listened patiently, then listened again, then removed his glasses. Elliot Kane. The name surprised him, not because he remembered it immediately, because he almost did. The memory sat just beyond reach. He opened old records, paper records, actual paper. A rarity now, dust rose from the cabinet. Minutes passed, and 20, then 30. Finally, he stopped, looked at one page, then another, and froze. What is it? Claire leaned forward. The manager swallowed. Unit 428, silence. Mason exchanged a glance with Claire. The manager continued. The account never closed. Claire frowned. That's impossible. I agree. But? The manager pointed at the ledger. The rent continued. Now everyone became quiet. Very quiet, because that changed everything. A forgotten storage unit was one thing. An active storage unit paying rent for 7 years was something else entirely. Someone had maintained it, secretly, consistently, deliberately. Claire asked the obvious question. Who paid? The manager shook his head. Anonymous trust account. Interesting. Very interesting. Unit 428 sat at the rear of the property. Far from the entrance, far from casual observation. The corridor smelled faintly of concrete and machine oil. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Some flickered, others remained dark. The place felt frozen in time, as though the last decade had happened somewhere else. They stopped before a steel door. Number 428, nothing special, no markings, no clues, just a lock. Mason removed the silver key, inserted it. The mechanism clicked immediately. No resistance, no hesitation. Someone had maintained this lock carefully. Claire noticed too. The door opened. Neither person moved right away. The moment felt important. Not because of treasure, because of uncertainty. Then Mason pulled the door upward. Metal rattled. Light spilled inside and both of them stopped. The unit wasn't full. It wasn't empty either. One workbench, one steel cabinet, 3 storage cases, a desktop computer, and a motorcycle. A black Harley-Davidson. Pristine, perfectly maintained. As though Elliot Kane had parked it yesterday. Dust covered almost nothing, which meant somebody had visited recently. Very recently. Claire walked slowly forward, examining everything, the computer, the cabinet, the cases. Mason approached the motorcycle. Something immediately caught his attention. The fuel tank carried a small sticker, barely visible, almost hidden, a faded white rabbit. He froze. The image triggered a memory, a warehouse video. 1 frame, 2 seconds. The reflection, the bearded man with the scar beneath his eye, standing beside the motorcycle. This motorcycle. Suddenly, several pieces aligned. Not all enough. Claire opened the steel cabinet, then stopped, completely. What? She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside. Inside sat dozens of file folders. Neatly organized, dated, labeled, documented. 7 years of evidence, not partial evidence, complete evidence. Names, transactions, financial transfers, vehicle histories, government contacts, corporate participants, everything. The kind of archive investigators dream about. The kind powerful people fear. Claire stared, speechless, which for Claire Donovan was unusual, very unusual. Then they heard footsteps not nearby. Outside, 2 sets, moving toward Unit 428, both froze. The corridor had been empty moments earlier. Now it wasn't. The footsteps grew louder, closer, closer, then stopped directly outside the unit. Silence, heavy silence, the kind that arrives before something changes. Mason slowly turned toward the entrance. A shadow moved across the concrete floor. Then a voice spoke from outside. Calm, professional, dangerously calm. Mr. Hale. Mason recognized the tone immediately. Someone accustomed to control, someone accustomed to being obeyed. The voice continued. We should talk. Claire's face hardened, because she recognized it too. Grant Mercer, Rachel Sterling's security chief. And if Grant Mercer had found Unit 428, it meant Rachel Sterling was no longer behind them. She was right on top of them. Nobody moved. Not immediately. The storage unit suddenly felt smaller than it had 30 seconds earlier. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere deeper inside the building, a ventilation fan rattled against old bearings. The sound seemed absurdly loud. Mason stood beside the motorcycle. Claire remained near the filing cabinet. Outside, Grant Mercer waited, patiently. The way professionals wait when they already know rushing serves no purpose. Then Grant spoke again. Mr. Hale. His voice carried no threat. That was what made it unsettling. Threats are easy to identify. Confidence is harder. We both know you're not walking away from that unit with everything inside it. Claire's jaw tightened. Mason didn't answer. The silence stretched. Grant finally sighed. Not dramatically, almost disappointed. Then his shadow shifted beneath the doorway, and he stepped inside. Tall, gray hair, dark jacket. Exactly the face Mason had seen reflected years earlier in Elliot Kane's video. The scar beneath the left eye, the same one. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Grant noticed Mason staring, then gave a small nod. You found the footage. Not a question. A statement. Mason studied him. You're the man in the warehouse. Grant looked unsurprised. Eventually, someone would figure that out. Claire stepped forward. You were part of the operation. Grant looked at her. No. The answer came immediately, without hesitation, without defensiveness, which somehow made it more believable. Claire folded her arms. Then explain. Grant glanced toward the motorcycle. Toward the filing cabinet, toward the computer. The object seemed familiar to him, painfully familiar. Then he said something neither of them expected. I was Elliot Kane's backup plan. Silence. Complete silence. The words didn't fit. Not with the story. Not with Rachel Sterling. Claire stared. You expect us to believe that? Grant met her gaze. I don't particularly care what you believe. Then he looked at Mason. But if you want the truth, stop assuming everybody inside the story was on the same side. That landed. Because Mason had been thinking exactly that. Good people, bad people, victims, perpetrators. Life rarely arranged itself so neatly. Grant walked slowly toward the workbench. Nobody stopped him. Nobody seemed certain they should. Finally, he pointed toward the motorcycle. Elliot bought that 6 months before he disappeared. Mason remained silent. Grant continued. He said if things ever went wrong, he'd leave enough breadcrumbs for the right person to follow. Claire frowned. The right person? Grant looked directly at Mason. Not investigators. Then who? A mechanic. The room became very quiet again. Mason felt something shift internally, a memory, an old conversation years earlier. Detroit, an auction facility, thousands of vehicles. One man, Elliot Kane. The memory surfaced slowly. Not because it was dramatic, because it seemed insignificant at the time. A brief conversation beside a damaged collector car. Elliot had asked a strange question. What was the first thing Mason looked at when evaluating a vehicle? Most people expected an answer involving engines, market value, condition reports. Instead, Mason had answered honestly the frame. Always the frame. Because the frame tells the truth. Everything else can lie. Elliot had laughed, then said, That's probably why you're difficult to fool. At the time, the comment meant nothing. Now it meant everything. Grant interrupted the memory. Elliot trusted mechanics. Claire looked confused. Grant noticed. He didn't trust lawyers. He glanced at her. Sorry. Claire didn't smile. He didn't trust auditors. He pointed toward the filing cabinet. He definitely didn't trust politicians. Nobody argued. Grant walked towards the steel cabinet. Opened one drawer, then another. He knew exactly where things were. Too exactly. Mason watched carefully. How often have you been here? Grant stopped, then answered honestly. Every 3 months. That answer hit harder than expected. Claire stared. You've been maintaining this unit for 7 years? Yes. Why? Grant looked down briefly. For the first time, something human appeared beneath the professionalism. Regret. Real regret. When Elliot disappeared, his voice lowered. I promised his wife I wouldn't let the evidence vanish. Nobody spoke. The ventilation fan continued rattling somewhere above them, a sound both ordinary and strangely comforting. Grant closed the drawer, then looked directly at Mason. Rachel doesn't know the full story. That surprised everyone, including Claire. She hired you. Yes. Then why are you here? Grant took a long breath. Because Rachel thinks its evidence threatens her. And it doesn't? It does. Another pause then, just not the way she thinks. The statement hung heavily. Mason felt the puzzle changing shape again. Every answer created 2 more questions. The hallmark of a good mystery, or a bad situation. Often both. Claire pointed toward the cabinet. Start talking. Grant nodded slowly. Then reached into the lowest drawer. Deep inside sat a sealed envelope. Yellowed with age, untouched. The handwriting across the front was neat, precise, personal, for whoever finally finds the truth. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Almost. Grant lifted the envelope carefully, like something fragile, then handed it to Mason. The paper felt surprisingly heavy. Not physically, emotionally. Years compressed into a few ounces of paper. A dead man's final instructions, a vanished investigator's last move. The room suddenly revolved around that envelope. Nothing else mattered. Not the cars. Not Rachel Sterling. Not the storage unit. Not the evidence. Just that Mason broke the seal. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The photograph fell first, landing face up on the workbench. All 3 people looked down simultaneously, then froze, because the photograph showed Elliot Kane, standing beside another man, arm around his shoulder, both smiling, both younger, both alive. The second man was instantly recognizable. Not Rachel Sterling. Not Harold Denton. Not Grant Mercer. Someone else. Someone far more powerful. Someone whose face appeared regularly on television. Governor Thomas Whitaker, current governor of Wyoming. Future presidential candidate. The room became silent. Dangerously silent. Claire looked up first. Disbelief visible for the first time all day. That's impossible. Grant said nothing. Mason turned the photograph over, a date written on the back. 8 years earlier. 1 year before Elliot disappeared. Then he unfolded the letter. The first sentence immediately changed everything. Not because it revealed a secret, because of who it was addressed to. Not investigators, not police, not journalists, not prosecutors, the letter began. If you're reading this, Mason Hale, it means I guessed right. Mason stared. The words blurred for half a second, then sharpened again. Claire looked over his shoulder. Grant closed his eyes briefly, almost sadly, because somehow Elliot Kane had known exactly who would eventually find Unit 428. And the next page promised an answer neither of them was prepared to hear. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The fluorescent lights continued humming overhead. The old ventilation fan rattled somewhere beyond the corridor. A motorcycle sat motionless in the corner. The entire storage unit seemed suspended outside time. Mason stared at the letter, then read the first line again. If you're reading this, Mason Hale, it means I guessed right his name, not a coincidence. Not a lucky guess his name. Claire slowly lowered herself onto a folding chair. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, she looked genuinely unsettled. Grant Mercer remained standing near the workbench, hands folded, eyes lowered. Almost as though he already knew what came next. Perhaps he did, Mason continued reading. The handwriting was neat, methodical. The handwriting of someone accustomed to documentation, someone who's expected every word to matter. Mason, if this letter reached you, then I failed. I hoped there would be another outcome. I hoped the evidence would reach investigators. I hoped people with authority would do what was right. I hoped many things. Most of them turned out to be mistakes. The first page ended there. Mason turned it over. The second page began immediately. You probably don't remember me. We met only twice. Both times at vehicle auctions in Detroit. You were younger, still impatient, still willing to argue with people who deserved it. The memory surfaced instantly. Not because the meetings had been important. Because Elliot Kane had been unusual. Most people at auctions looked at prices. Elliot looked at people. The first time they'd met, Elliot spent 20 minutes asking questions about frame restoration. Not market value. Not resale projections. Frames, the hidden structure beneath appearances. At the time, Mason assumed he was eccentric. Now he wasn't so sure, the letter continued. You once told me something. You said a vehicle's frame eventually reveals every lie built around it. Fresh paint lies, documentation lies, salesman lie, owner's lie. But steel remembers. That sentence stayed with me. Mason stopped reading. A strange feeling moved through him. Not fear, recognition. Something closer to discomfort, the realization that a casual conversation years earlier had mattered far more than he realized. Claire watched silently. Grant remained motionless. Mason continued. When I began collecting evidence, I trusted the wrong people. When that failed, I trusted institutions. When that failed, I trusted procedures. Eventually, I realized something. The people hiding the truth controlled most of those things, but they could not control competence. They could not control patience. And they could not control someone who knows how to recognize value where others see junk. That is why I chose you. The room felt smaller again. Mason read the paragraph twice. Then 3 times the words landed differently each time. Across the room, Claire quietly whispered, "He built the entire contingency around you." Grant nodded once. Nothing more. Mason turned the page. The next section changed everything. If you're reading this, then car number 8 survived. Good. That means the transfer worked. Mason froze. Car number 8, not random, not chance. Planned. Every piece planned, the letter explained. 7 years earlier, Elliot discovered evidence linking politicians, business executives, auction networks, insurance brokers, and several state officials to a sophisticated fraud operation. Not simple theft. Not stolen vehicles. Identity laundering. Collector cars declared destroyed, insurance claims paid. Vehicle identities transferred, assets reappearing under new ownership histories, millions of dollars hidden behind paperwork. The profits flowed through shell companies, political donors, real estate acquisitions, campaign funds, legitimate businesses. Everything looked clean. That was the genius of it. Nothing appeared illegal in isolation. Only the complete picture revealed the truth. Mason kept reading. Then he reached the paragraph that made Claire stand up. The network was never controlled by Rachel Sterling. Her name appeared because she was useful. The real architect was someone else. Someone protected. Someone ambitious. Someone preparing for national office. The governor. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Almost the storage unit seemed to contract around them. Mason looked at the photograph again. Governor Thomas Whitaker, smiling beside Elliot Kane. Years before the disappearance, Claire shook her head slowly. Jesus. The words escaped before she could stop them. Grant looked away. Mason continued reading. Whitaker never touched transactions personally. That was the point. He built layers. people between people, companies between companies, distance between responsibility and action. If you are reading this letter, then eventually some will try to convince you the evidence is incomplete. They will tell you it proves nothing. They will tell you context is missing. They will tell you I was unstable or bitter or dishonest. They already prepared those stories years ago. The warning felt disturbingly realistic, because it was exactly how powerful people survived. Not by denying facts, by confusing them. Mason turned another page, then stopped completely. The final section contained a name he recognized immediately. Not from politics, not from business. From his own life, a cold sensation moved through his chest. For a moment, he simply stared. Claire noticed. "What is it?" Mason didn't answer. Not immediately. He read the line again, then handed her the letter. Claire's eyes moved down the page, then widened. Grant saw her reaction and immediately understood. The name belonged to someone all three knew, someone none of them expected. Victor Lang's silence, heavy silence. Claire read further, then lowered the page. No, Grant frowned. "What?" Claire looked toward Mason. Disbelief filled her expression. The letter shook slightly in her hands. Victor wasn't helping Elliot investigate the network. Another pause, then Victor was inside it. The words hit like a physical impact. Mason remained perfectly still, which somehow made the moment worse. Victor, the man who identified car number 8, the man who warned him, the man who revealed Elliot Kane, the man who had been guiding every step. Grant walked closer, took the letter, read the paragraph himself, then closed his eyes. A brief moment. Enough. When he opened them again, something had changed. The professional calm remained, but underneath it sat something darker. Disappointment. Real disappointment. That explains too much. Nobody disagreed. Because suddenly every conversation with Victor looked different. Every warning, every clue, every helpful piece of information. Had he been helping or steering? The distinction mattered enormously. Mason looked toward the motorcycle, toward the files, toward the evidence. The story was changing again. Not because the truth was becoming clearer, because it was becoming larger, more complicated, more human, the way real stories always do. Then a sound interrupted the silence, a vibration, soft, electronic. Coming from somewhere inside the storage unit, everyone turned. The sound came from the computer, a black screen that should have remained inactive. Instead, it had powered on by itself. The monitor flickered once, twice, then displayed a single message. Access detected, welcome back. Victornabody moved. The screen changed again. A loading bar appeared, slowly filling 10%, 20, 30. Then a final line appeared beneath it. Live connection established for the first time in hours. Grant Mercer looked genuinely alarmed, and Mason suddenly realized something terrifying. Victor Lang hadn't been following their investigation. He had been watching it in real time. Nobody spoke. The monitor glowed in the dim light of Unit 428. Access detected, welcome back. Victor, the words seemed impossible. Not because computers couldn't display messages, because Elliot Kane had disappeared 7 years earlier. The storage unit should have been dormant, forgotten, abandoned. Instead, something inside the system had been waiting, watching, expecting. Grant Mercer moved first, not dramatically, just quickly enough for everyone to notice. He crossed the room and disconnected the network cable from the back of the desktop tower. Nothing changed. The screen remained active. The loading bar continued moving. 42%, 43, 44. Claire stared. That's not possible. Grant looked behind the computer, then inside the cabinet, then beneath the desk. His expression darkened. There isn't any network cable. Nobody liked that answer, especially because it was true. The machine wasn't connected to anything. No internet, no modem, no visible antenna. Nothing, yet the screen remained alive. 51%, 52. Mason stood motionless, watching, thinking. Something bothered him, not the computer, not the message. Something else, something Elliot had written. The memory surfaced suddenly, like a photograph developing. They could not control competence. They could not control patience. And they could not control someone who knows how to recognize value where others see junk. The line echoed in his mind. Recognize value where others see junk. Then Mason looked around the storage unit again. Really looked, not at the obvious things, the details, the workbench, the filing cabinets, the motorcycle, the old desktop. Everything appeared important, which meant one thing. Something wasn't the oldest trick in the world. Hide a secret among distractions, the governor, the files, the corruption network. Victor, all dramatic, all attention-grabbing. Perhaps too attention-grabbing. Interesting, very interesting. The loading bar reached 60%. Claire turned toward him. What are you thinking? Mason didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward the motorcycle. The Harley-Davidson sat exactly where they'd found it. Perfect condition, perfect maintenance, perfect placement, too perfect. His eyes moved lower. Toward the floor beneath it, dust, concrete, oil stains, years of neglect, except for one section, a rectangle. Cleaner than the surrounding surface. Barely noticeable, but present. Mason touched the concrete. Then smiled, a small smile, the dangerous kind. Claire recognized it immediately, the same expression he'd worn beside car number 8. What did you find? Mason pointed. Neither Claire nor Grant saw it initially. Then they did a seam, a thin line cut into the concrete floor, a hidden panel. Not large, not obvious, just enough. Grant walked over, knelt beside him. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Grant quietly said, well, Mason nodded. Yeah, the loading bar reached 71%. The monitor suddenly emitted a soft tone. Everyone looked back. A new message appeared if you found the floor first. Good silence, absolute silence. Claire blinked once, twice, then slowly turned toward Mason. Elliot expected this. Grant's eyes narrowed. No, not expected. Engineered, the difference mattered. Someone had built the entire sequence deliberately. The computer, the message, the distractions, everything. The realization sent a chill through the room. Because it meant Elliot Kane had prepared for people exactly like them. Years in advance, the screen changed again. Most people open the files. Most people chase the politicians. Most people miss the real story. The words remained visible. Then another line appeared. Mason won't. Nobody spoke, not one word. The room suddenly felt much colder. Mason stared at the screen. Not frightened, not impressed, just thoughtful. Because Elliot wasn't describing him. He was predicting him 7 years earlier. Somehow. Claire looked almost offended. Who writes a treasure hunt for a person they barely know? Grant answered before Mason could. Someone who spent years studying people. That felt correct. Disturbingly correct. The computer beeped again. Final instruction. Open the floor. The screen went black. Immediately, completely. The room returned to silence. Grant exhaled slowly. Claire rubbed her temples. Mason stood, walked toward the workbench, picked up a pry bar, then returned to the hidden seam. The metal edge slipped beneath the panel. Pressure, resistance, more pressure then. Click, the seal broke. Dust drifted upward. The panel lifted, darkness below. A hidden compartment, not large, perhaps 3 feet deep. Protected, sealed, waiting. Mason aimed a flashlight inside, then stopped moving. Completely, the compartment contained only 3 items: a black metal case, a sealed envelope, and a small digital recorder. Nothing else, no gold, no cash, no dramatic treasure, just information, the most dangerous treasure in the modern world. Claire stared downward. That's it? Grant shook his head. No. His voice sounded strangely distant. That's everything. The distinction mattered. Mason carefully removed the recorder first. Dust covered the surface. Yet the battery indicator still flashed green. Recently serviced. Recently maintained. Interesting. Very interesting. The envelope sat beneath it, handwritten once again. The same precise handwriting, Elliot Kane. But this envelope carried a different message for the person who stayed. Not the person who searched. The phrase immediately caught Mason's attention. Stayed, not searched. Stayed. He handed the envelope to Grant. Grant read it, then froze. Not dramatically, just enough. The reaction lasted perhaps 1 second, but it was there and Mason noticed. Claire noticed too. What is it? Grant remained silent, which answered the question better than words could. Claire stepped closer. What does it say? Grant finally handed her the envelope without speaking. Claire read the front, then looked up confused, then surprised, then deeply concerned. Because the envelope wasn't addressed to Mason. It wasn't addressed to investigators. It wasn't addressed to Elliot's family. The envelope was addressed to Grant Mercer. The room became completely silent. Grant stared at the floor, at the hidden compartment, at the letter carrying his name, a name Elliot Kane had written 7 years earlier. Masons studied him carefully. The realization came immediately. Grant hadn't told them everything, not even close. Some connection existed between him and Elliot. Something personal, something important, something hidden, and judging by the look on Grant's face. Something painful then. Another sound interrupted the moment. A phone vibrating. Everyone looked down. Grant's phone, the screen illuminated Rachel Sterling, calling again and again and again, as if she suddenly knew something had changed. Rachel Sterling never called twice. People called her. not the other way around. Yet Grant Mercer's phone vibrated again, and again, and again. 5 calls in less than 90 seconds, the screen glowed in the darkness of Unit 428. Rachel Sterling, missed call. Rachel's missed calls. Rachel Sterling, missed call. Nobody reached for the phone. Nobody seemed eager to answer, because everyone understood the same thing at the same moment. Something had changed, and Rachel knew it. The question was how much. Grant stared at the device for several seconds, then silenced it. Not declined, not accepted. Silenced, the distinction mattered. Because declining a call sends a message. Silence creates uncertainty. Professionals understand the value of uncertainty, especially when powerful people become nervous. Mason watched him carefully. The envelope remained unopened in Claire's hands. Grant's envelope, Elliot's letter, 7 years old. Waiting, the room suddenly felt centered around it. Not the files, not the governor, not the evidence, the letter. Grant finally looked up. His expression had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The professional distance remained, but something underneath it had fractured. A wall, an old one, the kind people spend years maintaining. Mason spoke first. How did you know him? Grant didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the motorcycle, ran one hand across the fuel tank, stopped over the faded white rabbit sticker, then smiled, a sad smile, the kind produced by memory rather than happiness. Elliot put that sticker there. Nobody interrupted. He hated motorcycles, Claire blinked. What? He was terrified of them. The answer felt absurd, almost funny. Yet nobody laughed, because Grant wasn't joking. He bought the bike anyway. Grant's eyes remained fixed on the sticker. Said fear was expensive if you fed it. For a moment, the storage unit disappeared. Not physically, emotionally, replaced by another scene, another year. Another life. A younger Elliot Kane, a younger Grant Mercer. Friends, real friends. The realization landed heavily. Claire looked down at the envelope again, then slowly handed it to Grant. Nobody objected. The name on the front belonged to him. Grant stared at Elliot's handwriting. For several seconds, then carefully broke the seal. The paper inside unfolded with a soft crackle. The silence deepened. Grant began reading. His eyes moved steadily across the page, then slowed, then stopped. Nobody spoke, nobody dared. Eventually, Mason noticed something strange. Grant wasn't blinking, not much, not normally, and then he understood why. Because Grant Mercer was trying very hard not to cry. The realization shocked everyone, especially Claire, because people like Grant didn't seem capable of that. Not externally, not visibly, not publicly, yet there it was. Human grief, 7 years delayed. Grant finally lowered the page. His voice sounded different now, rougher, older. Elliot knew. Mason waited. Knew what? Grant looked directly at him. That I'd survive. The answer confused everyone. Grant noticed Elliot always believed he was the one who'd get caught. He laughed quietly, without humor. He was wrong. Nobody interrupted. The story needed room. Grant folded the letter once, then twice, carefully, like something fragile. Elliot wasn't gathering evidence because he wanted revenge. Claire frowned. Then why? Grant looked toward the cabinet, the files, the records, 7 years of secrets. Then answered. Because somebody died. The room became still again. Another piece sliding into place, another truth emerging from beneath older truths. Grant continued. Her name was Rebecca Kane. Mason immediately understood. Elliot's wife. Grant nodded, almost as though he'd read the thought. 3 years before Elliot disappeared, Rebecca died in a highway accident. Claire remained silent. Listening, Grant continued. The official report blamed mechanical failure. Something about the way he said it felt important. Very important. Mason leaned forward slightly. Grant noticed. So Elliot investigated. The room suddenly felt colder. He thought the accident report was wrong. Was it? Claire asked. Grant stared toward the floor, then answered quietly. Yes. The single word carried enormous weight, because if the report was false, everything changed. Grant continued. Elliot discovered the vehicle involved in the crash wasn't the original vehicle. Nobody spoke. The implications arrived immediately. Identity laundering, vein fraud, insurance manipulation. The same network, the same methods, the same corruption. Except this time someone died, and that transformed financial crime into something else entirely. Something personal, something unforgivable. Grant closed his eyes briefly, then continued. Rebecca wasn't supposed to be driving that car. The statements hung in the air. Mason frowned. What does that mean? Grant took a long breath, because the answer hurt even now. Even after 7 years, the vehicle had previously been declared destroyed. Silence. The replacement parts were counterfeit. Claire slowly sat down again, understanding. Real understanding, the kind that arrives all at once. Not gradually. A woman dies. A husband asks questions. The questions reveal fraud. The fraud reveals corruption. The corruption reaches politicians. Then the husband disappears. Suddenly, the entire story made sense and became much darker. Grant looked toward Elliot's files. Elliot never wanted money. He paused. He wanted names. Nobody doubted that. Not anymore. Then Mason noticed something, a detail. A small one, but details mattered. Grant never mentioned Rachel Sterling. Not once. Interesting. Very interesting. Mason decided to ask directly, "Where does Rachel fit into this?" Grant immediately answered, "Nowhere near the top." That surprised Claire again. Grant noticed. Rachel inherited part of the operation. Another pause, then. She doesn't even know how much of it exists. The statement felt believable, because true power often hides behind visible power. Rachel looked important. Therefore, someone above her probably mattered more. Grant continued. The governor isn't the top either. Now everyone looked at him. The room became completely silent. Not the governor? Then who? Grant walked toward the steel cabinet, opened a drawer, removed a single file, thinner than the others. Older, he placed it on the workbench. Nobody touched it. The label contained only one word. Foundation, nothing else, no name, no logo, no explanation. Just foundation. Mason stared. The word meant nothing, which made it dangerous. Grant's voice dropped, lower than before. Elliot believed everything connected back to them. Claire looked up. Them? Grant nodded. Slowly, carefully, almost reluctantly. Then said the sentence that changed the entire direction of the story. The foundation existed before Rachel. Another pause. Before the governor. Another pause. Before Elliot. The storage unit suddenly felt much larger and much more dangerous. Because the enemy wasn't a person anymore. It was something older. Hidden, patient, organized. The kind of thing capable of surviving generations. The kind of thing Elliot Kane had spent years trying to expose. The kind of thing that might already know Unit 428 had been opened, as if summoned by the thought. Grant's phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't Rachel Sterling. The screen displayed a different message. Unknown number. Only 3 words appeared. We see you. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because for the first time since opening car number 8, someone else had made the first move. Nobody moved. The message remained on Grant Mercer's phone. We see you. 2 words. Nothing more. No signatures, no explanation, no threat. And somehow that made it worse. Threats usually reveal emotion. Emotion reveals weakness. This message revealed nothing, only awareness. Someone knew exactly where they were, exactly what they had found. Exactly when they found it, the realization settled over Unit 428 like a layer of cold dust. Claire stood first, instinctively. The habit of someone who had spent decades investigating people capable of lying professionally. How secure is this facility? The question sounded ridiculous the moment she asked it, because the answer no longer mattered. Someone had already reached them. Grant looked at the phone, then slipped it back into his pocket. They're not watching the building. Claire frowned. What? Grant looked toward the workbench, toward the files, toward the hidden compartment beneath the floor, then finally toward the computer. They're watching the evidence. Nobody liked that answer, because it felt true, very true. Mason remained silent, thinking the same way he always did when something important happened. Slowly, methodically, without panic, the foundation, the governor, Rachel Sterling. Victor Lang, the pieces kept expanding, yet one detail still refused to fit the beginning, the 12 junk cars. Everything else connected. The storage unit, the memory card, the evidence, the disappearance. But the cars remained strange, almost too strange, interesting, very interesting. Then footsteps echoed through the corridor outside, heavy, purposeful, approaching quickly. Everyone looked toward the entrance. Grant immediately shifted position. Not aggressively, professionally. The movement of someone accustomed to preparing before understanding the problem. The footsteps stopped outside the unit. A shadow crossed the floor. Then a voice spoke. Female. Calm, controlled, familiar. Grant, nobody inside, seemed surprised. Rachel Sterling stepped into Unit 428. For a moment, nobody said anything. Not because her arrival was shocking, because her expression was. She looked tired, genuinely tired. The sort of exhaustion expensive clothes cannot hide. No entourage, no lawyers, no security team, no assistants, just Rachel. Alone. The woman whose name had haunted the investigation since the beginning. The woman everyone assumed was the villain. And somehow, She looked more worried than dangerous. Rachel's eyes moved around the room. The motorcycle, the files, the hidden compartment, the letter, the black metal case. Every detail registered immediately. Then she looked directly at Mason. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Rachel said something unexpected. "You found it. Not anger, not accusation. Relief. Actual relief." Claire noticed instantly, so did Mason. Grant merely sighed, as though he had expected exactly this reaction. Rachel walked slowly toward the workbench. Nobody stopped her. Nobody seemed certain they should. Finally, she stopped beside the file labeled Foundation. The word appeared to affect her. Not visibly, just enough. Mason noticed. Rachel noticed him noticing. Then she laughed softly, without humor. Of course he found that. Nobody understood the comment, Rachel continued. Elliot always loved dramatic reveals. The statement felt personal. Too personal. Claire folded her arms. You knew him? Rachel nodded. Yes, another piece slid into place. Not a suspect, not merely a business connection. Something deeper, something older. Claire stepped forward. Then start explaining. Rachel remained quiet for several moments, choosing her words carefully, the way people do when truth becomes dangerous. Finally, she spoke. The first thing you need to understand. She paused. Is that Elliot Kane was my brother? Silence, absolute silence. The room stopped breathing. Even Grant looked away. Not because he was surprised, because he wasn't. Claire stared, disbelief visible across her face. Mason remained motionless. Rachel's brother. The revelation changed everything, instantly. The entire investigation shifted. The assumptions, the motivations, the relationships. Everything. Rachel watched them process it, then continued. Elliot and I didn't speak much during his final years. Her voice remained calm, too calm. The calm of someone who had repeated this truth privately many times. He believed I chose money over people. Another pause. He wasn't entirely wrong. Nobody interrupted. Rachel looked toward the motorcycle. The old Harley, the faded rabbit sticker. A memory seemed to pass through her eyes, briefly then disappear. When Rebecca died, her voice softened. Something broke inside him. Grant lowered his gaze. The storage unit grew quieter. Rachel continued. He stopped trusting everyone. She looked toward Claire, the government, toward Grant, friends, toward herself, family, then finally toward Mason. But he never stopped investigating. The statement felt obvious now. 7 years of evidence surrounded them. 7 years of obsession. 7 years of determination. Rachel nodded slowly, as though reading the same thought. He knew the foundation existed. Claire spoke immediately. What is it? Rachel smiled sadly. The wrong question. Nobody liked that answer, she continued. The correct question is who built it. The distinction mattered. Because organizations do not create themselves. People do, always. Rachel reached toward the black metal case. Stopped, then looked at Mason. He left that for you. The sentence felt strange, personal, specific, almost impossible. Yet Elliot's letter proved otherwise, Rachel continued. Elliot believed you'd eventually open it. Why? Mason finally spoke, the first words he'd said in several minutes. Rachel met his gaze, then answered honestly. Because you weren't important. Nobody understood. Rachel saw the confusion, then explained. Important people attract attention. Interesting. Very interesting. The room listened. Rachel continued. Politicians attract attention. Investigators attract attention. Journalists attract attention. Executives attract attention. She pointed toward Mason. But a mechanic restoring junk cars in Wyoming? The answer arrived before she finished. Nobody watches him. Nobody notices him. Nobody expects him. Rachel nodded. Exactly. Elliot didn't hide the truth from powerful people. She looked toward the hidden compartment. He hid it from people who expected to find it. The logic was elegant. Simple, brilliant, very Elliot Kane. Then Rachel's expression changed. For the first time since arriving, something darker appeared. Something closer to fear. Real fear. She looked directly at Mason, then at Grant, then at Claire, and finally at the black metal case when she spoke again. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Whatever you'd. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Don't assume Elliot wanted the evidence released. The statement landed like a hammer. Everything stopped, because it contradicted the entire investigation. Every assumption, every motive, every expectation. Claire stared. What? Rachel looked toward the case, then answered quietly. Elliot didn't build this archive to expose the foundation. Silence. Heavy silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The ventilation fan rattled somewhere distant. Nobody spoke. Then Rachel finished the sentence. He built it to stop something. And suddenly the black metal case became the most important object in the room. For several seconds, nobody touched the black metal case. The object sat in the center of the workbench. Silent, ordinary, almost disappointing. The kind of container a mechanic might use for tools. The kind of box a traveler might forget in a garage. Nothing about it suggested 7 years of secrets. Nothing about it suggested men disappearing. Nothing about it suggested governors, investigators, hidden archives, or shadow organizations. Which was exactly why Elliot Kane had chosen it. Mason understood that immediately. Real secrets rarely look important. That was one of the first lessons he learned in the restoration business. People steal engines, people steal jewelry, people steal paintings. Nobody steals rusted bolts. Yet sometimes the rusted bolts are the only things holding the entire machine together. Rachel stood motionless. Grant remained silent. Claire watched everyone. Years of investigative work had taught her something simple. The moment before an answer appears is usually more dangerous than the answer itself, because hope still exists. Reality hasn't arrived yet. Then Pisson reached forward. The metal latch clicked open. Nobody breathed. The lid lifted slowly. Inside sat only 3 objects, a portable hard drive, a sealed envelope, and an old digital video camera. Nothing more, no stacks of money. No government documents, no hidden passports. Just 3 items. The simplicity felt deliberate. Elliot had spent years constructing contingency plans. He would not leave anything unnecessary. Mason picked up the envelope first. The handwriting was familiar now, precise, measured. Patient, the front read, "Open this before the drive." Rachel closed her eyes briefly, as though she already knew what came next. Mason opened the envelope. A single sheet of paper unfolded. The message was short, very short, far shorter than expected. "If you found this, then you are standing at the same crossroads I once faced. You believe the evidence matters. You believe the truth should be exposed. You believe corruption must be punished. I believe those things too. Then I learned something. Sometimes the truth is not dangerous because it is false. Sometimes the truth is dangerous because it is true. Before you access the drive, watch the recording. Only then decide what should happen next." Elliot, nobody spoke. The words lingered in the room. Simple, direct, unsettling. Claire folded her arms. "I don't like that." Rachel nodded. "We're supposed to." Mason picked up the camera. The battery still showed power, another detail that made no sense, until he remembered. Someone had been maintaining Unit 428 for years. Perhaps Elliot planned for that. Perhaps someone else ensured it happened. Either possibility felt uncomfortable. He pressed play, the screen flickered, static darkness. Then a face appeared. Elliot Kane, older than in the photographs, thinner, more tired, but unmistakably alive. For a moment, nobody moved. Because this was the first time any of them had actually seen him. Not in documents, not in records, not in still images. A real human being, looking directly into the camera. Looking directly at them. Elliot adjusted the lens, then smiled. A small smile, not unlike Mason's. "If you're watching this," he paused. "Then things went exactly as badly as I expected." The room remained silent, Elliot continued. "I'm recording this because eventually somebody will find the evidence." Another pause. "I just hope it isn't too late." His eyes looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The eyes of someone who had spent years carrying something heavy. Then his expression changed. More serious now. "Before you do anything with the information on the drive, there is something you must understand." The words seemed directed specifically at Mason, though everyone listened. "The foundation is not what people think." Claire frowned immediately. Grant didn't. Rachel looked away, which worried Mason. Elliot continued. "Most people imagine secret organizations as groups controlling the world." A faint smile. "They've watched too many movies." Nobody laughed. Elliot didn't either. "The truth is more complicated." The camera shifted slightly. He leaned forward. "The foundation began 43 years ago." Silence. 43 years, older than Rachel, older than most of the people involved, far older than anyone expected. Elliot continued. "It was created after a series of financial collapses threatened several critical infrastructure projects across the western United States. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The story had become larger again, and stranger. The founders were businessmen, politicians, bankers, transportation executives, and state officials. A pause. They believed the public would never accept the actions required to prevent economic disaster. Claire whispered. "Oh no," Elliot kept speaking. "So they created a private network." The room felt colder. At first, their goal was stability. Another pause. "At first, Those words mattered, because every terrible story begins with good intentions. Then something changes, Elliot continued. The second generation protected the organization. The third generation expanded it. The fourth generation exploited it. Rachel lowered her eyes. Grant remained completely still, and suddenly Mason understood. The foundation wasn't a conspiracy. Not originally, it was a system. A structure, a machine, built by people, inherited by people, corrupted by people, just like every institution in history. Elliot looked directly into the camera, then said the sentence nobody expected. Rachel Sterling is not your enemy. Silence, absolute silence. Claire stared at Rachel. Rachel stared at the floor. Grant closed his eyes. Nobody seemed surprised except Mason. Elliot continued. Neither is Grant Mercer. The camera remained steady. His voice remained calm. The people you're most likely to blame are not the people who created the problem. Then who? The question appeared on everyone's face. Elliot answered immediately. The danger is what comes next. The room became very quiet. What comes next? Claire whispered. On the screen, Elliot almost seemed to hear her. The foundation is dying. Nobody spoke, because that possibility had never occurred to them, not growing, not expanding. Dying, Elliot nodded slowly. As power fragments, different factions compete for control. A pause. Some want reform. Rachel looked up. Some want profit. Grant remained as expressionless, and some believe chaos is preferable to losing authority. Nobody liked where this was heading. Nobody. Then Elliot leaned closer to the camera, and for the first time fear appeared in his eyes. Real fear, the kind impossible to fake. The files on the drive contain enough information to destroy the foundation. The statement landed heavily. Claire looked toward the hard drive. Rachel looked toward the hard drive. Everyone did. But Elliot wasn't finished. If released publicly, a pause. Thousands of ongoing contracts collapse. Another pause. Transportation projects stop. Another. Pension funds freeze. Another. Energy infrastructure becomes vulnerable. The room fell silent. Because suddenly the decision wasn't simple anymore. Expose corruption, yes. Destroy everything connected to it? That was different. Very different. Elliot continued. The evidence proves crimes. A pause. It also proves dependencies. Nobody moved. The distinction mattered enormously. Then Elliot delivered the final blow. The people responsible deserve consequences. His voice hardened. But if the information is released carelessly. He stopped, looked directly into the camera, directly at Mason. Millions of innocent people will pay the price for crimes they never committed. Silence. Heavy silence. The video continued for several more seconds. Then Elliot said one final sentence. A sentence that changed everything again. I didn't spend 7 years hiding the truth. Nobody breathed. Elliot's eyes remained fixed on the camera. I spent 7 years trying to find a way to reveal it safely. The recording ended. The screen went black. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The ventilation fan rattled somewhere in the distance. The hard drive sat in the middle of the workbench, waiting. No longer a weapon. No longer evidence. A choice. And for the first time since car number 8 appeared in Mason Hale's driveway, he realized the mystery was never about discovering the truth. It was about deciding what to do with it. Then a notification appeared on Grant's phone. One new message, one image, no text, just a photograph. Ava. Leaving school in Sheridan less than 10 minutes earlier. The blood drained from Mason's face, because somebody had just announced they knew exactly where his daughter was. For a moment, nobody moved. The photograph remained on Grant Mercer's phone. Ava, walking out of Sheridan Elementary. Pink backpack, brown jacket. Winston the rabbit, hanging from one shoulder by a worn strap. The timestamp showed 11 minutes earlier. Nothing appeared wrong. No stranger beside her, no obvious threat, no danger visible. That was exactly what terrified Mason, because whoever sent the image wasn't trying to hurt Ava. Not yet. They were sending a message. A simple one. We know where she is. The distinction mattered. Threats create panic. Information creates obedience. The people behind the message understood the difference. Very well. Mason reached for his keys immediately. Rachel grabbed his wrist. Not forcefully, just enough. Mason. He looked at her. The expression in his eyes made everyone else step back internally. Not rage, not fear, something colder. Something simpler, a father. Rachel released his arm immediately because she understood, perhaps better than anyone else in the room. I know what you're thinking. No. Mason's voice remained calm, dangerously calm. You don't. Nobody interrupted. Rachel continued anyway. If you leave right now, you'll do exactly what they expect. Mason stared at her, then looked at the photograph again. Ava, his daughter, the little girl who complained about oatmeal, the little girl who drew rabbits driving junk cars, the little girl who still knocked on his bedroom door whenever thunderstorms became too loud. Nothing else mattered. Not governors, not corruption, not evidence, not foundations. Ava. Claire spoke carefully. Mason. He didn't answer. Grant did. She's right. That surprised everyone, especially Rachel. Grant continued. If they wanted your daughter, they wouldn't send a picture. The logic landed immediately, painfully, professionally, correctly. The room became silent again. Grant stepped forward. They want movement. Another pause. They want mistakes. Mason hated that explanation because it made sense. The best lies always contain truth. The best traps always contain choices, and right now he had one. Drive 8 hours back to Wyoming or stay. Neither option felt safe. The realization settled heavily. Then Rachel spoke again. This wasn't sent to you. Everybody looked at her. Interesting, very interesting. Rachel nodded toward the phone. It was sent to Grant. Silence. Absolute silence. Grant frowned. What are you talking about? Rachel crossed the room, took the phone, studied the image, then zoomed into the corner, a reflection. Tiny. Almost invisible. The reflection of a parked vehicle, a black SUV. Grant immediately understood. His face changed, not dramatically. Just enough. Claire noticed. Mason noticed. Rachel definitely noticed. Grant looked away, which answered the question before words did. Rachel handed back the phone. That SUV belongs to your team. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Grant finally exhaled, slowly, carefully, then nodded. Yes. Claire stared. What? Grant's voice remained steady. My people were monitoring Ava. The room exploded. Not physically, emotionally. Claire stepped forward instantly. You were what? Grant didn't flinch. Didn't retreat. Didn't defend himself, which somehow made the revelation worse. I assigned protection. Silence, then. What? Mason's voice was almost a whisper. Grant met his eyes. I placed surveillance around the school 2 days ago. Nobody understood. Not yet, Grant continued, after Victor Lang appeared. Now everyone listened. Very carefully, because the name mattered. More than ever, Grant folded his arms. For 7 years, Victor stayed invisible. A pause. Then suddenly he contacts Mason. Another pause. Suddenly he knows about the car. Another. Suddenly he knows about the evidence. The logic became difficult to ignore, Grant continued. People don't emerge from hiding without a reason. Interesting. Very interesting. Claire looked toward the files, then toward the storage unit, then back toward Grant. You think Victor exposed the location? Grant nodded, possibly. Why? Grant didn't answer immediately, because the answer was uncomfortable. Then because Elliot never trusted him. The room became still again. Another piece, another crack, another shift. Everything seemed connected to Victor now. Every clue, every warning, every appearance. The realization bothered Mason more than he wanted to admit, because Victor had helped, repeatedly. But had he helped the investigation, or manipulated it? The distinction remained unclear. Then Rachel walked toward the computer. The monitor still displayed darkness. The machine appeared dead. Inactive, finished. Rachel touched the side panel, then stopped. Interesting, very interesting. She tapped the metal twice, then again. Different spots. Listening, everyone watched. Nobody understood. Finally, Rachel smiled, the smallest smile. Not happiness, recognition. I knew it. Claire frowned. Knew what? Rachel looked directly at Mason. Your daughter isn't the target. Nobody liked where this was heading. Not even Grant, Rachel continued. The target was always you. Silence. Heavy silence. The words echoed inside Unit 28, because deep down, everyone already suspected it. The cars, the memory card, the key, the storage unit. Every road somehow led back to Mason Hale. A mechanic, a widower, a father. A man nobody important noticed, at least until now. Rachel touched the computer again, then pulled the side panel opened. Inside sat a second hard drive, hidden, separate from the main system. Claire stared. Grant stared. Even Mason looked surprised. Rachel smiled sadly. Elliot. Pause. Always one more secret. Then she removed the drive, a small label attached to the casing. Only 4 words, nothing more. No explanation, no instructions. No names, just 4 handwritten words. For Ava, when Reed Nabati spoke, nobody breathed, because suddenly the entire story changed again. Not corruption, not politics, not money. Ava, the little girl in Sheridan, the child Elliot Kane had never met. The child born years after Elliot disappeared. The child whose name somehow appeared on a hidden drive buried inside a forgotten storage unit. The room fell completely silent. Then Mason slowly took the drive from Rachel's hand. his heart beating harder than it had all day, because for the first time since opening car number 8, this wasn't about a conspiracy anymore, it was personal. And somewhere years ago, Elliot Kane had known it would be. Nobody touched the drive, not immediately. The small black device rested in Mason's hand for Ava when ready, 4 words. Nothing more, no explanation, no date, no instructions. Just 4 words written by a man who disappeared 7 years before Ava ever learned how to ride a bicycle. The contradiction hung in the air. Heavy, impossible. Rachel stared at the drive. Claire stared at Mason. Grant stared at the floor. Nobody seemed capable of producing a reasonable explanation. Finally, Claire spoke. That's impossible. Nobody argued. Because Ava was only 10. Elliot vanished years before her birth. There was no logical connection, no timeline that worked, no obvious answer, which meant one thing. The answer wasn't obvious. Interesting. Very interesting. Mason turned the drive over, examining it carefully, the same way he'd inspected car number 8, patiently, methodically, without assumptions. Then he noticed something, a second label. Almost hidden beneath the first, partially torn, faded with age. Only 2 letters remained visible. Silence. The room became still again. H. Mason's Hale. Rachel immediately understood. So did Grant. Claire followed a second later. The drive wasn't originally for Ava. It was originally for Mason. At some point, Elliot changed his mind, or updated the plan, or anticipated something. The question was why. Rachel walked toward the computer, connected the drive. Nothing happened. For several seconds, the screen remained dark. Then a single file appeared, one recording. Time-stamped 8 years earlier. Mason clicked play. Static darkness. Then Elliot Kane appeared again. Only this recording looked different. Older camera, lower quality. Earlier, the Elliot on screen looked healthier, less exhausted, more hopeful. He adjusted the camera, sat down, looked directly into the lens, then smiled. Hello, Mason. The room froze, not because Elliot knew his name. They already knew that. Because he spoke as if they were friends, as if he expected this conversation, as if time itself wasn't involved. Elliot leaned back. If you're watching this, a pause. Then something happened to me. Another pause, then a laugh, short, dry, without humor. Honestly, that's not surprising. Nobody moved, Elliot continued. I know this looks strange. The understatement almost made Claire smile. Almost. Elliot shook his head. I imagine you're wondering why I chose you. Mason watched silently. The answer mattered. More than anything else. Elliot leaned closer, then delivered it. Because you saved my life. Silence. Absolute silence. The words struck like a physical blow. Mason stared, confused, completely confused. He had never saved Elliot Kane. At least not intentionally, not knowingly. Elliot anticipated the reaction immediately. You don't remember. Another pause. No reason you should. The image shifted slightly. Then Elliot continued. Detroit. Mason felt something stir, a memory, distant, incomplete. Elliot kept speaking. Winter. The memory sharpened. A snowstorm, an auction facility, ice. Darkness, a collapsed storage structure, people shouting. Emergency vehicles. The recollection arrived slowly. Then all at once, 8 years earlier, an industrial auction yard outside Detroit. Metal store rack failed during a storm. Several workers trapped. One injured. Mason had spent hours helping rescue crews pull people out. One of those people. Elliot Kane. The realization hit hard. Not because Mason remembered Elliot, because he hadn't. The rescue happened. People survived. Life continued. He never thought about it again. But Elliot had, apparently, for years. The recording continued. You stayed. Elliot smiled. A real smile this time. Everybody else left when the professionals arrived. Another pause. You stayed. The words mattered. Not because they were dramatic, because they were specific. The same word from Grant's letter. Stayed. Not searched. Not investigated. Stayed. Interesting. Very interesting. Elliot continued. I learned something about people that night. The room remained silent. The people who stay are different. Another pause. They aren't smarter. Another. They aren't stronger. Another. They simply refuse to leave when things become inconvenient. Mason lowered his eyes briefly. The statement felt uncomfortable. Not because it was flattering. Because it felt true. Elliot continued. When Rebecca died, the smile vanished. Instantly, the room changed with it. The grief remained visible, even years later. I needed someone I could trust. Another pause. And trust became expensive. Nobody interrupted. Nobody could. The recording had become something else now. Not evidence, not information. A confession. The camera shifted slightly. Elliot looked away for several seconds, gathering himself, then continued. I didn't know Ava would exist. That got everyone's attention, immediately. Elliot nodded. As strange as this sounds. A faint smile. The drive was never meant for her. Exactly what Mason suspected. The mystery deepened. Elliot continued. It was meant for you. Silence then. But plans change. The words landed heavily. Because something had changed Elliot's mind. Something important. The answer arrived moments later. Elliot reached beside the camera, picked up a photograph, held it toward the lens. The image wasn't perfect, but recognizable. A hospital room. A woman holding a newborn child. Mason, his wife, and baby Ava. The room froze completely. Mason stopped breathing for a moment, just one moment, because that photograph should not exist. Nobody in Colorado spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody understood. Elliot answered before the question formed. Your wife sent it. Silence. Mason felt the world narrow. His wife, Emma, gone for 6 years, gone far too early, gone before Ava remembered enough. Elliot continued softly. Emma wrote to me. Another pause, several times. Nobody expected that, nobody. Not even Mason, especially not Mason. Elliot smiled sadly. She never told you. A laugh, gentle this time. She said you worried too much already. The room became very quiet because suddenly Emma existed again. Not physically, but emotionally, present close, alive inside memory. Elliot looked directly into the camera. If you're seeing this, Emma is probably gone too. The words landed heavily, painfully, accurately. Mason looked away. Only briefly then back, Elliot continued. She asked me for one favor. The room listened. Every word mattered now. Every word. Protect Ava if you couldn't. Silence then. I promised. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The recording continued. I don't know whether I kept that promise. A pause. But if this reaches her, another. Tell her mother never stopped believing in people. The room felt smaller, more personal. The foundation, the governor, the corruption, all of it faded temporarily. This was about something else, something simpler, a promise. Then Elliot's expression changed again. More serious now, more urgent. I need you to understand something. The warning returned. The same warning from before, only stronger. Victor Lang is not the mastermind. Interesting. Very interesting. Everyone looked up immediately. Elliot continued. He never was. Another pause. He was recruited. Another. He was manipulated. Another. And now the screen flickered. Static briefly interrupted the image. Then Elliot returned. He's trying to fix what he helped create. Silence. Grant frowned. Rachel stared. Claire stopped blinking. Because everything they believed about Victor suddenly changed. Again, the image deteriorated. The recording was ending, but Elliot had one final thing to say. One final secret. One final twist. He leaned toward the camera, looked directly into the lens, directly at Mason, then spoke 3 words, a name, not the governor, not Rachel, not Victor. Someone else, someone none of them had suspected. Someone still alive, someone powerful, someone currently sitting less than 50 miles from Sheridan. And the moment the name left Elliot's lips, Grant Mercer's went pale. Nobody spoke. Not immediately, the recording had ended. The monitor sat dark, silent, dead. But the final name Elliot Kane had spoken remained alive inside the room, like smoke after a fire. Impossible to ignore, impossible to escape. Grant Mercer stood completely motionless. His face had lost color. Not all of it, just enough. Enough for everyone to notice. Enough for everyone to understand. He knew the name, not casually. Personally, deeply. Rachel Sterling stared at him, then whispered no. The word escaped before she could stop it. Grant looked away, which answered the question better than any explanation. Claire was the first to speak. Grant. No response. Grant, again. Nothing then finally. He's alive. The sentence landed heavily, because Elliot's final revelation wasn't merely shocking. It was impossible. At least it should have been. Yet nobody in the room felt confident saying so anymore. Not after everything else. Not after the hidden compartment. Not after the letters. Not after the storage unit. Not after Elliot predicting events 7 years in advance. Nothing felt impossible anymore. Mason looked directly at Grant. Who is he? Silence. The question hung there, demanding an answer. Eventually Grant spoke. His voice sounded tired, older, as if years had suddenly returned all at once. The foundation wasn't built by executives. Nobody moved, Grant continued. It wasn't built by politicians. A pause. It wasn't built by corporations. Another pause then. It was built by one man. The room became very still. Rachel closed her eyes. Claire folded her arms. Mason waited. Grant continued. His name is Arthur Blackwell. Nobody recognized it, at least not immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. Because names hidden from public memory are often the most dangerous. Grant nodded slowly. Exactly. Most people wouldn't know him. Another pause. They weren't supposed to. Claire stepped forward. What was he? Grant laughed softly, without humor. What wasn't he? Nobody interrupted. Grant continued. Transportation, banking, energy, construction, insurance. Another pause. He never owned controlling interests. Interesting. Very interesting. Mason immediately understood minority stakes, ownership, invisible influence. The most powerful people rarely appear at the top of organizational charts. Grant nodded. Exactly. Arthur Blackwell had spent 40 years creating networks, relationships, dependencies, influence. Not power people could see, it's power people relied upon. The distinctions mattered enormously. Then Rachel spoke, quietly as if speaking to herself. My grandfather knew him. Silence. Grant looked at her, not surprised. Rachel continued. He used to visit our house. Nobody moved. The story kept growing. Every answer revealed deeper roots. Every secret revealed older secrets. Claire frowned. How old is Blackwell? Grant took a long breath, then answered. 84. The room became silent again. Because 84-year-old men aren't usually the villains of billion-dollar conspiracies. Yet, nobody laughed. Nobody dismissed the possibility. Because everyone understood something simple. An empire built over 40 years doesn't disappear because its architect becomes old, Grant continued. The foundation wasn't his greatest achievement. Another pause. It was his insurance policy. The words landed heavily. Insurance? Against what? Against whom? Mason asked. Grant answered immediately. Change. Interesting. Very interesting. The room listened, Grant continued. Every major project, every contract, every acquisition, every political transition. Another pause. The foundation positioned itself between instability and opportunity. Rachel stared toward the floor as though seeing old memories, old conversations, old warnings. Finally, she spoke. He called it stewardship. Grant nodded. Of course he did. Rachel laughed, a bitter laugh, the kind produced when truth finally catches up with language. Everything sounded noble when Arthur explained it. Nobody disagreed, because that is how dangerous ideas survive. Not through fear, through justification. Grant continued. The first generation believed they were protecting people. The second believed they were protecting institutions. The third believed they were protecting investments. Another pause, the fourth protected themselves. Silence, complete silence, because corruption rarely arrives suddenly. It evolves, gradually, patiently. Generation after generation, until nobody remembers where the line originally stood. Then Claire asked the question everyone avoided. Where is Blackwell now? Nobody spoke for several seconds, then Grant answered. Wyoming. The room seemed to shrink again. Everything returning home, everything circling Sheridan, returning to the beginning, returning to Ava, returning to Mason. Interesting, very interesting then. Grant's phone vibrated. One message, unknown number. Again, this time not an image, just text, a meeting request, coordinates, a location, and one sentence. Arthur Blackwell would like to speak with Mason Hale. Nobody liked that. Nobody. Claire immediately shook her head. No, Grant agreed. Surprisingly, no. Rachel looked toward Mason. Absolutely not. 3 different people. 3 different agendas. One identical answer. No. Mason studied the coordinates. A ranch, 30 miles outside Sheridan. Remote, private, old, the sort of place people disappear inside stories. Then another realization arrived. Arthur Blackwell wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He wasn't denying anything. He was inviting them. Interesting, very interesting. The confidence bothered Mason more than threats would have. Because confident people know something. The question was what? Then another voice filled the room. Not from a phone, not from a speaker. From the doorway, a real voice, a real person. Actually, everyone turned. The man standing there looked older than Mason remembered. More tired, more worn, gray hair, weathered face, regret visible in every line. Victor Lang, alive, present, real, nobody moved. Grant immediately stepped forward. Claire tensed. Rachel stared. Victor remained where he stood. Hands visible, empty. No weapon, no threat, only exhaustion. Then he spoke the first honest words anyone had heard from him. Arthur Blackwell isn't inviting Mason because he's afraid. Silence, absolute silence. Victor looked directly at Mason, then finished the sentence. He's inviting you because Elliot's final plan already worked. Nobody breathed, not for a moment. Because if Victor was telling the truth, then everything happening now, the cars, the evidence, the storage unit, the letters, the recordings, had never been Arthur Blackwell's victory. They were Elliot Kane's, and somewhere inside that realization, the true ending of the story finally began to emerge. Victor Lang stood in the doorway. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The storage unit felt frozen between past and future, between truth and consequence. Victor looked older than the man Mason remembered from Detroit, not physically, spiritually, like someone who had spent years carrying a debt that could never fully be repaid. Then he stepped inside, slowly, carefully, as though entering a church rather than a storage unit. His eyes found the black metal case, the letters, the Moserdieskel, the files, and finally Mason. A faint smile appeared, sad, relieved, exhausted. He did it. Nobody understood, not completely. Victor nodded toward Elliot's recordings. He actually did it. Grant folded his arms. What exactly did he do? Victor laughed quietly. The laugh of a man finally seeing the end of a very long story. Elliot never wanted the Foundation destroyed. Nobody interrupted, because they already suspected that. Victor continued. He wanted it exposed, a pause, but only after removing the people capable of turning exposure into catastrophe. Interesting, very interesting, the room listened. Victor walked toward the workbench, then placed a thin folder beside the black case. A single name appeared on the cover, Arthur Blackwell. Nothing else. Victor looked at Mason. The Foundation is already finished. Silence. Rachel frowned. What? Victor nodded. It's over. Another pause. Arthur just doesn't know it yet. The statement landed heavily. Because men like Arthur Blackwell always knew everything. Or believed they did, Victor continued. Elliot spent 7 years building evidence. Another pause. He spent the final year building succession. Nobody moved. The story finally began revealing its shape. Victor explained. The Reform faction already controls most operational assets. Grant immediately understood. His eyes narrowed. Interesting. Very interesting. Rachel understood, a moment later, then Claire, then Mason. The Foundation wasn't being destroyed. It was being replaced, quietly, carefully, patiently. The corrupt elements isolated, the criminal actors documented, the essential infrastructure protected, the innocent shielded. Exactly what Elliot described in the recording. Reveal the truth safely, not recklessly. Victor smiled sadly. He solved the problem, another pause, then disappeared before taking credit. That sounded exactly like Elliot Kane. Nobody disagreed. Then Mason asked the question that remained. The original question, the first mystery, the 12 junk cars. Victor laughed, a genuine laugh this time for the first time in the entire story. Then he looked toward Mason. You still don't know? Mason shook his head. Victor nodded. Interesting. Very interesting. Then he finally explained. Car number 8 was never meant to reach you. Silence. Absolute silence. Victor continued. It was being transported between storage locations. Another pause. The transport company was controlled by Arthur's people. Another. Elliot altered the routing system before he vanished. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed, almost. Victor smiled. The destination field contained a trigger. What trigger? Claire asked. Victor looked directly at Mason. Your name. Silence. The room stopped. Completely. Victor nodded slowly. Elliot programmed the transfer order years earlier. Another pause. If the evidence was ever moved without authorization. Another. The vehicle would eventually be routed through auction recovery channels. Another. And delivered to the one person he trusted. Mason. Interesting. Very interesting. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. He planned that 7 years ago? Victor smiled. No. A pause. He planned it 8. Nobody spoke. Because suddenly the entire story looked different. Not luck. Not coincidence. Not fate. Preparation. Patience. Trust. Then Victor handed Mason another envelope, the final envelope. Elliot's handwriting. One last message. Mason opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Only a few lines, no dramatic confession, no hidden revelation. Just words. Simple words, the kind that matter most. Mason, if this reaches you, then the important part is over. You found the truth. Now comes the difficult part. Living with it. The world rarely improves because someone uncovers corruption. It improves because someone chooses responsibility after uncovering it. Protect Ava. Remember Emma, and whenever possible, leave things better than you found them. Thank you for staying. Elliot's silence filled the room. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Outside, evening sunlight stretched across the Colorado mountains. Golden, quiet, peaceful. The first peaceful moment in a very long time. 3 weeks later, Arthur Blackwell resigned from every remaining board position. Federal investigations quietly began. Several executives disappeared from public life. Multiple criminal cases emerged. The governor announced he would not seek national office. No dramatic press conferences followed. No cinematic arrests, no revenge. Only consequences. Real consequences. The kind that arrives slowly. The kind that last. Rachel Sterling testified voluntarily. Grant Mercer assisted investigators. Claire Donovan returned briefly from retirement. Victor Lang finally told the whole truth, and Mason Hale went home. Back to Wyoming. Back to the small house. Back to the garage. Back to Ava, the place where the story truly belonged. One evening, several months later, Afa sat on the garage floor drawing. Winston the rabbit rested beside her, a familiar position, a familiar scene, the sort of ordinary moment people rarely appreciate until much later. Ava looked up. "Can I ask something?" Mason smiled. "Sure. Did you ever figure out why somebody left all those junk cars here?" Mason laughed. The memory felt distant now, almost unreal, yeah. Ava waited. "So why?" Mason thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because somebody believed trash and treasure are usually the same thing." Ava considered that. Children always take ideas seriously. Finally, she nodded, then returned to drawing, conversation complete. Outside, sunlight faded across the valley. Inside, the old kitchen clock still ran 3 minutes slow. The refrigerator still clicked every few hours. The house remained imperfect. Small, ordinary home. And for the first time in years, that was enough.